On this week's episode of Where We Are, we'll discuss the latest entrance into the 2024 GOP primary. Plus, we have breaking news on the debt ceiling negotiations. We'll share that with you right after the break. You're listening to Where We Are.
Hello, Where We Are listeners. If you're a longtime fan of this podcast or you're just joining us for the first time today, we want to tell you more about our podcast platform called Spotify for Podcasters. We've been using this platform for over a year, and it's been easy to use, and new features are added all the time. You can record and edit podcasts from your phone or computer. You don't need anything fancy, and you don't need previous podcast experience. When you hit publish, you will distribute your podcast to Spotify and everywhere else podcasts are heard. Video podcasts are also available on Spotify if that's your kind of thing. And with Spotify for Podcasters, you can earn money in a variety of ways, including ads and podcast subscriptions. But here's the thing, you can earn money, but it's a free platform. There's no catch. If you're curious or want to see what it's all about, download the Spotify for Podcasters app or go to www.spotify.com/podcasters to get started.
This is Where We Are. We are the Wares. I'm Michael.
I'm Melissa.
And we're back with you for another week. And just before we started recording, Melissa, we got breaking news. I'm not going to share all the details, because I want to make sure that what's the fine print of what's come out is real. And also need a little time to process the fine print that has come out. But just before we started recording, Speaker McCarthy and President Joe Biden announced that a deal has been reached on debt ceiling, on raising the debt ceiling and avoiding default. Melissa, again, we'll comment on the particulars on the Morning Five this week. But I have to say, I hope that, Speaker McCarthy tweeted out about the deal and had to include this dig at Biden, which really to me reflects how scared our politicians are of telling their folks that they've made a deal with quote unquote the other side. And so McCarthy couldn't even get out the tweet, even though he said the deal was a good deal for the American people, but he couldn't get that out without also, making clear to his side that he doesn't like Biden, that Biden, screwed up somehow, So that's a, it's frustrating that with all the bipartisan accomplishment, both sides seem really seem hesitant to claim it as bipartisan accomplishments because they know so many of their own supporters hate the other side, in large part because through the fundraising operations and through much of the activity of politicians, they spend time telling their side how much they should hate the other side.
It's a circle.
Yeah, no, it is. But this, I hope that we're able to get a moment where, you see the president and the speaker side by side. This deal has something for everyone not to like, which is, generally how these deals should be in a closely divided Congress. There are new work requirements. We'll cover the details on the Morning Five. I think the main point I want to get out is I hope that there's a moment to recognize this bipartisan achievement, especially because, Melissa, I'm also, this is intentionally a little patronizing. I'm proud that they didn't wait until right up to the deadline.
Me too.
So often with these debates, they need to wait until the last moment, so the pressure is as intense as it can get, and they could, tell their side, we had to make a deal, we were on the brink. But Treasury Secretary Yellen had extended the deadline to June 5th this past week, and so they've come to an agreement almost over a week ahead of that. Now, it should be said, the last comment I'll make on the debt ceiling, just because Speaker McCarthy and President Biden have come to an agreement doesn't mean it's going to pass Congress. I think it's really likely. I think it would. I think it's really. I'd put the odds at something like 20-25%, because the stakes of not getting this right are pretty high. But there will have to be a vote, and it will be a tough vote for some of these members. So it's not a done deal. But usually, President and the Speaker come to an agreement, and they'll be able to muscle it through if they have to. Melissa, any thoughts on the debt ceiling deal?
I got to read the first paragraph of the deal, and that's all I've read.
Yeah,
so
this just broke, like literally
10 minutes ago.
10 minutes before we hit record.
Fresh off the press.
Hot off the press.
Hot off the press. I mean, here's the thing.
Fresh and hot.
The only thing I'll say is Secretary of Treasury Janet Yellen was basically guessing when she was giving them any kind of deadline, whether it was June 1st a couple weeks ago, June 5th.
Well, yeah, you have to. I mean, it's a really hard.
Well, that's what I'm saying is that I feel like they couldn't have gone up to the line because we weren't sure if the line was the correct line.
Yeah.
So I'll say. So I'm very grateful that they have gone before June 1st, simply because we don't know when some of these exactly what bills will come due. We would have to actually choose to default on. It would have been just a mess.
Yeah.
Just from like a logistical standpoint.
Well,
let alone
and even getting close to the deadline, the markets get skittish.
Yes, the markets were already extremely ready for this to continue to be a sort of like big fight. So.
Yeah. Okay, so that'll be big news for this week. That basically means, Congress, its agenda is going to be set for this week. There's going to be debate, votes. Senator Mike Lee in Utah has said he's going to use procedural ploys to try and hold this up in the Senate because he doesn't think the cuts in spending are sort of structural enough, and so it won't be exactly smooth sailing, but I think by Thursday we'll have a signed bill. We'll see if I'm right. The main thing we want to discuss, there has been so much 2024 news. Mm-hmm. I don't plan, Melissa, on doing, for 2020, I did a whole podcast that was walking folks, as someone who has led religious outreach for a presidential campaign, walking people through the 2020 race, both the primaries and the general. I don't plan on doing a separate podcast, and so where we are will be sort of a place where you can come to, where listeners can come to get a sort of inside read on how this presidential race is developing, particularly as it relates to people of faith, but also generally as well. And we had a busy week in the primary on the Republican side this week, right, Melissa?
Mm-hmm. We did. We had Senator Tim Scott announce on Monday, this last Monday, that he would be running. He had announced that he had formed an exploratory committee previously, a couple months ago, but he announced. And then on Wednesday, we also had Florida Governor Ron DeSantis jump in on Wednesday. Do you want to go over Tim first?
Yeah, let's do this in chronological order. I want to play you, I think, 2 excerpts from, we'll play one, talk about it, and then I want to play another from Tim Scott's announcement. He announced on Monday and had a pretty big Senator John Thune from South Dakota, who's often been in presidential race talks and as a potential VP, he endorsed a really significant endorsement, I think, out of the gate for Tim Scott. So Senator Thune was part of the program, and Senator Tim Scott gave maybe 35-minute talk. I want to play a couple clips near the end of the stump speech. Here's the first one.
Finally, my grandfather's stubborn faith was not just faith in the goodness of America. It was faith in God himself. Amen. I will be the president who stops the far left's assault on our religious liberty. I will preserve one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Yes, we will. Yes, we will. We will be the nation where we honor our Creator and respect every innocent life. This is who we are. This is who we can be. This is the freest, fairest land where you can go as high as your character and your grit and your talent will take you. I bear witness to that. I testify to that. That's why I'm the candidate the far left fears the most. You see, when I cut your taxes, they called me a prop. When I refunded the police, they called me a token. When I pushed back on President Biden, they even called me the N-word. I disrupt their narrative. I threaten their control. The truth of my life disrupts their lies.
So, Melissa, once again, and we talked about this several episodes back, there are things I disagree with there. There are things I wish he didn't say, things I wish he would have said. This isn't a sort of ideological statement. Just as an objective observer, that is someone who has a distinct message, who's running for a reason, who isn't, whose message comes from who he is, as opposed to what we so often see, which is someone who wants to be president and is sort of seeking after a message that will that they feel will get them there. And those are the kind of people I want to see running. People who have something distinctive to contribute. I have some other comments about the remarks, but what stuck out to you?
Well, for those who are just listening and don't have time to look up the clip or watch it to see the visuals, but he has a lot of energy. He was walking around on that stage. At one point, he has a handheld microphone, even though he actually has a lapel microphone as well, because at some points he actually lets the handheld down, but it can obviously still be heard. And he's just moving back and forth, really trying to drum up excitement in the crowd, which I think probably his team has thought on the Republican side as well on the Democratic side. Obviously, besides like Nikki Haley, like he's young. He's far younger than the others. And even if like Pence or Christie get in, like they're much older than he is.
That's so interesting, Melissa.
And the front runner Trump is much older. Now, obviously DeSantis could be, put on par with like age, but I think what they've already seen DeSantis in action as governor. And, he's definitely more like traditional behind a podium to give his remarks. And we've already seen complaints by a lot of people who attend the fundraisers with DeSantis saying that the retail politics, that sort of energy, his team is working really hard with him on that because that's sort of where he's weaker. Whereas I think Tim Scott's team is like come out of the gate looking very young, very spry, energetic. so that people can feel excited about the campaign. And then obviously when he goes into the preacher cadence, it's also fascinating as well. When he starts, trying to, not only drum up the crowd, but it's also harkens back, because like right at the beginning of the clip, he's talking about his grandfather and the faith of his grandfather, and he talked about in his exploratory committee announcement his faith, his deep faith, the deep faith of his parents. But I think also what his campaign team have told him is what you were just saying: make it so that everything you do, you are staying true to yourself, so that when Democrats, like, back when Romney ran, Democrats, one of their main sort of attacks on Romney was that he wasn't true to himself. He was a flip-flopper. He would be the be anything, do anything type of candidate.
Yeah.
Whereas for his team, they're telling him one of the ways that you'll be able to create a new lane is not just the energy, the youngness, but also staying true to yourself, not flip-flopping. Everything that he's run on as senator, everything he's voted on as senator, rings true with whatever his stump speeches look like, and obviously his rhetoric. And then what I'm interested to see is obviously some policy platforms for him, to see if those also run true.
I do think, I've been a little struck with how transparently his campaign laid the trap, and how incredibly liberals have fallen into it. I mean, you just heard in the remarks there, he lays, that sort of progressives go after him because his life story, which, is tied up with race and class, is a truth that, counters their lies. And he talked about sort of disparaging racist comments that have come from the left when he's been sort of out there. And we've seen, like, this week in reaction to his announcement, like, some racist things said about Tim Scott, and this sort of he doesn't get it, and it actually gave him like a ton of earned of free media, and so that was one sort of striking thing. And I don't think progressives are going to be able to help themselves. Now, the fact that his campaign is playing into that, I think it's smart strategically. It does also show they're playing a kind of identity politics of their own, and it's just sort of that's reality. You could analyze that. You could have your opinions about that, but that's clearly what's happening. Another thing I wanted to point out about his remarks, and Melissa, you sort of said this when we weren't recording. He does a few things. One, you'll notice he often refers to the far left, and obviously, and if you listen to other parts of his remarks, he's clearly trying to prove that he's not too nice to be president for GOP primary voters. We've talked about this on an earlier episode, this concern among GOP primary voters: if you're too nice, if you're too reasonable, if you don't hate the Democrats enough, then you don't have what it takes to be president. Scott has clearly sort of is doing a number of things to show that he can take the fight to the other side. One of them is by using the term far left. Now, what's interesting about that, you'll notice this isn't the case all of the time, but often when politicians refer to the far left or the far right, one thing they're trying to do is appeal to winnable members of the other party. In other words, as opposed to saying, Democrats are wrong on A, B, and C. Democrats are destroying the country, or Republicans are destroying the country. You say the far left or the far right, and that gives a sort of permission for independents and winnable members of the other party to say, well, yeah, I don't agree with the extreme of my party either, and this candidate is appealing to me. So it's an interesting sort of, he's trying to play to the base of the party while also not isolating voters that he thinks he can win in a general election. And so, a very interesting announcement. I do want to play one more clip, Melissa, from the close of his talk. Interestingly, he sort of steps down from the stage and almost kind of enters the crowd and gives an interesting message. Listen to it here.
You see, America is a city on the hill. We are the beacon in the midst of darkness. We have an unusual responsibility. We have the responsibility to prove that self-governance works. We have the responsibility to share for 1,000 generations what America has done for me, she can do for you. This can't be another presidential campaign. We don't have time for that. We need a president who persuades not just our friends and our base. We need a president that persuades. We have to do that with common sense, conservative principles. But we have to have a compassion for people. We have to have a compassion for people who don't agree with us. We have to believe that our ideas are so strong and so powerful and so persuasive that we can actually take it to the highest points in the world and be successful. But we also have to be able to take it all the way down to places that today are hopeless and prove that who we are works for all Americans. I'm living proof that God and a good family and the United States of America can do all things if we believe. Will you believe it with me?
So, Melissa, just describe, because that's the first time you've seen that clip.
It's the first time, yeah.
Describe to folks what they may not have been able to see or even hear from that.
Yeah, so the very beginning of the clip, that America's a city on a hill, he's still up on stage with that microphone. That little break that you hear, he's walking down the stage and he's right at the front of the crowd. And so that's why you can hear the crowd's little comments as he goes along, which is incredible because his mic is picking it up, like the little
yes.
amen, the little yes, sir, those types of things. When he says that we have to have a compassion for people we disagree with to get some woo, yas.
At a campaign announcement event. At a Republican campaign announcement
that
event.
Fills up my fuel tank for a while. That, okay, we're not as, and again, he says we're not as hopeless as we thought we would be. I'm like, oh, this is even working on me. And I do this for a living and this is working on me. But one of the other reasons why it worked on me is that I think for a lot of our listeners who are conservative or Republican or independent leaning that way, you were formerly, but you've gone independent, whatever, that you have felt that the Republican Party has gone away from conservatism or the kind that you grew up with.
Yeah.
With the idea that Tim Scott, that entire end of it, he doesn't say it, but what he is actually saying is that we got to show for the first time in a long time that these conservative ideals that we believe in actually do work and work on the ground and will create a better, more prosperous America. And I just find that absolutely fascinating that a candidate for 2024 is going this route. But again, his team, they're looking for that through line, that pathway that will distinguish him between a Trump or a DeSantis, whomever.
Right. Because importantly, if you're closing your campaign rally with we need to take this message everywhere. We need to help the nation see that our ideas are better for them. What he's not saying is basically what Trump said and kind of what DeSantis goes toward, which is like, we're going to just bulldoze, the country. Like we have enough people to win, and the rest of the people who don't like it are just going to have to accept it. It's just a different approach. I'd be very surprised if we do not see that clip from when he goes down into the crowd, taken back out before Iowa. Mm-hmm. That is, it's pretty moving political theater, and I mean that in a values neutral way. I mean, it's just the kind of moment on the campaign trail, which is why I love politics. And so Tim Scott is in. He has significant cash on hand, so he's going to have. He may not have. He may not be entering this race independently wealthy, at least not to the extent that Trump is and some of these other candidates. But he has. He's already proven the ability to raise significant sums of money. He seems to have the campaign infrastructure to go the long haul. And so, look, not saying he'll necessarily gain traction, not saying, but I would not count him out. Tim Scott is in my top tier for likely for candidates running who can get the nomination. And we'll see how this plays out. Just a couple notes before we move on to DeSantis. One of the early complicating factors here is that both Tim Scott and Nikki Haley are from the same state. And so one of the dynamics you're going to see, and this is one of those like inside baseball kind of things that hopefully are part of what makes listening to this podcast worthwhile to you. One of the things to look for as this campaign plays out is you're going to see a primary before the primary in South Carolina between Scott and Haley. Mm-hmm. And it is very, very, very unlikely that both Scott and Haley are going to be in the race when South Carolina votes. It is too big of a risk for either of them to perform poorly in the state, and particularly to get trounced by one or the other. And so, fortunately for them, South Carolina isn't first. These aren't two candidates from Iowa or even New Hampshire. South Carolina, so Iowa and New Hampshire will help with the weeding out process. But there's going to be a winnowing of the field between them before South Carolina, even, I think, if both of them do moderately well. Let's say that they place third and fourth in Iowa and New Hampshire. I really highly doubt both of them will go into South Carolina. So that's something to be on the lookout for. And it's going to be interesting to see how much of their time they each spend in South Carolina. You would hope that you could kind of spend less time in South Carolina, invest in Iowa and New Hampshire, because voters know you in South Carolina already. On the other hand, the expectations for you performing well in South Carolina are going to be sky high, and particularly in Haley's case, she hasn't been an active politician in the state of South Carolina for quite some time. And so those are all dynamics that are going to play out. But Melissa, Tim Scott was not the only candidate who announced this past week. And it's important to say, Tim Scott in most of these polls is well under 10%. National polls, he's between 3 and 5. That's totally normal for this time of the campaign. It really doesn't suggest too much given recent precedent. But Ron DeSantis has been polling well. He is, at this point, the clear alternative to Trump. If there is an alternative to Trump, DeSantis is, in terms of public polling, leading the pack. There was some speculation as to whether he'd run, but this week he made it official. Let's hear from Governor DeSantis. So we should say... So I'm going to play for you the video his campaign released, making the announcement. He did have a separate announcement event, I guess we could call it, and we'll tell you about that. But here's the official campaign launch video from the DeSantis campaign.
Our border is a disaster. Crime infests our cities. The federal government makes it harder for families to make ends meet, and the president flounders. But decline is a choice. Success is attainable, and freedom is worth fighting for. Righting the ship requires restoring sanity to our society, normalcy to our communities, and integrity to our institutions. Truth must be our foundation, and common sense can no longer be an uncommon virtue. In Florida, we proved that it can be done. We chose facts over fear, education over indoctrination, law and order over rioting and disorder. We held the line when freedom hung in the balance. We showed that we can and must revitalize America. We need the courage to lead and the strength to win. I'm Ron DeSantis, and I'm running for president to lead our great American comeback.
So that's the announcement video, Melissa. What did you think? What was what kind of impression did it leave you with?
Well, yeah, you're right with the music. The music reminded me of Hans Zimmer's Time from Inception, which is designed to make you feel like you're on the edge of the seat, but also made me also feel very nervous. Anyways, yeah, the lines just really strike me as very 2022 midterms, which is an interesting route to take, especially because, we talk about Tim Scott trying to find a lane. Well, technically, DeSantis is trying to find a lane because he has, in his time over the last, maybe 2 years as governor, has gone very MAGA and has gone after MAGA constituents there and clearly will be making a play. But how will he distinguish himself against Trump in a lot of ways? I mean, there are some very obvious ways, but it's very interesting that it just felt, like you said, our borders, he started off with our borders and crime. Those are two just 2022 sort of lines that were battered again and again and again.
Well, yeah. I mean, so it is a DeSantis is hoping to take Trump's issues, but be deemed a winner after Trump lost in 2020. Mm-hmm. He's hoping that I think he knows Trump is going to have his his voters, but he's hoping to get enough of people who like Trump's combative, visceral language, like the reason why DeSantis puts the word infested into the first 10 words of that video is because he knows it's triggering for progressives. And he wants to trigger them. It's a very liberal tiers kind of strategy, and that's what our politics has turned into, particularly if you're running for Trump's voters. And so that's his approach. He wants to show that he could take the fight to Democrats better than Trump could in 24. He's going to say, look, we're very grateful for what Trump did in 2016. We're thankful that we didn't have a President Hillary Clinton. But in 2024, Trump is a weak candidate. So he'll say, let me take this banner moving forward. Now, a number of things have harmed that strategy. One, we've talked before, the Disney fight. Mm-hmm. So, I do think, this, he wants to take on Joe Biden and Nancy Pelosi, but he can't even take on Mickey Mouse. Like that kind of thing is going to be, that's going to be undermining for him as he tries to prosecute this case. The more that there's this perception that he was outmaneuvered by Disney, or that he was trying to perform a kind of dominating fighter presence, when Trump's voters feel like that's just who Trump is. And so the Disney thing could undermine it. The other thing that could undermine his sort of, look at what I've done as governor, look at my polling, my negatives aren't as high as Trump's, et cetera, et cetera. You can trust me to defeat Joe Biden in 24, is a lapse in execution that was seen in how he launched his very campaign. And of course, I'm talking about the Elon Musk Twitter announcement. Now, look, I think people who have said, voters aren't going to remember it in 2 weeks, I think that's basically right, unless Donald Trump wants to keep reminding them.
He already was on Truth Social.
Yeah, I think Trump could continue to enjoy sort of making something of this failure to launch from DeSantis. Just for background, it was announced that DeSantis was going to announce his candidacy on Twitter in an audio-only setting, so no video, audio only, with Elon Musk. And I don't want to go into the details too much. The site crashed. More than that, I found it to be profoundly undermining I thought DeSantis was put in a secondary position to Musk for his own announcement. So it was really weird. It was, on one hand, it was very tailored. It was a moderator, like a MC of their choosing. And it was a very, press weren't able to freely ask questions. They had a lineup of speakers. On the other hand, none of it played out in a way that made DeSantis look good. Sometimes Elon Musk was taking up airtime over DeSantis, Elon Musk would follow up DeSantis' answers to questions asked to DeSantis. Elon Musk would follow up with his own answers. Thomas Massey, congressman, was given the opportunity to ask a question, and of course, this was set up. And Thomas Massey spends what seemed like the first 90 seconds or so, talking about how much he admired Elon Musk and how he was the first congressman to own a Tesla, and this really icky sort of kissing up to Musk. And it's like, wait, this is DeSantis' announcement event. How do you get stood up at your own announcement? And it's very much like a Trump would never allow that to happen. And so, it was the whole thing was so poorly planned and executed, in my view, that it also undermines the idea that, I'm a fighter like Trump, but I'm just in a better position. I can execute better when Trump has all this baggage. It wasn't a great week for DeSantis, in my view.
Yeah, it was just so surprising how bad that Twitter space was, just how disorganized. Because in this age, the sort of digitization, the digital outreach of campaigns, what really began in 2008, the 2008 campaign, it became really sophisticated in 2012, even more sophisticated in 16 and 20, that you would think that his comms team would have had at least, several conversations. But then again, we know that Musk's team is apparently, quite bare bones. And so I'm sure they promised that Twitter would be able to keep up with it. And then it didn't. So, I mean, just a sort of interruption, at first, the first, 30 seconds, 1 minute, DeSantis wasn't even in the space. Can you imagine the panic? Oh,
right.
The panic, yeah. The panic
I would not want to be
room?
one of his staffers, as he's like, what's going on? This is just not a pretty scene. But, I think, Melissa, they're going to try and move on. They have, again, I do agree. I don't think we're going to see him drop from 20, 30 points, in a single, I don't think this is going to kill his campaign.
He raised a lot of money still in the first 24 hours.
Well, there's been a lot of debate and back and forth about how much of that money was held to be released in those 24 hours, bundled ahead of time, to have the appearance of momentum upon launch. Because from what I've been saying, Melissa, it's not wasn't like a wave of small donors, like $5 donations that came through. It was bundled money. At least that's what I've been seeing. So yeah, it's going to be interesting to see what kind of hit he takes. He could even see a bump despite the botched announcement, just because he is now officially a candidate. So there might be people who say, well, I've heard about him. I like what he's done in Florida. I like what he did on COVID. And now that he's officially in, I'm supporting DeSantis. So we'll just we'll watch the polling. I expect to see a number of new polls in the next week or so, both because of all the announcements that have taken place, and also I think folks are going to be interested to see in the aftermath of the debt ceiling negotiations what happens. But it's I guess one last thing to say is that Trump has gone after DeSantis pretty viciously.
Oh yeah, it was immediate. It was within minutes. They
immediate.
It
was full
meme videos.
Chaos. I mean, just full chaos and unmoored attacks and jokes that are sort of out of time and space and out of like even like jokes that don't have any ideological or political mooring, but are just memes and just sort of like online brain kind of stuff. It was, but Trump clearly sees DeSantis as his chief competitor at this point, and so I think that'll be a theme of the summer. The two of them going back and forth, if they both make it that long in terms of their political fortunes and futures. Melissa, anything else you're looking for as the 2024 primary field? It's not completely set. We're still looking to see if Christie jumps in. Governor from North Dakota, Sununu, I think, is taking a look. And if I'm some of these guys, DeSantis, I don't think scared me off with his announcement. And so maybe some of them who were waiting to see how DeSantis would launch, maybe they now feel even more encouraged to jump in.
Well, the person I'm waiting on is Mike Pence.
Right. If he makes it official,
Yeah.
which is should be soon.
Yeah.
If he
We just
does
haven't
make that
heard
jump.
any inklings of exactly when it will be, because we're about to hit June. If I were Pence's team, I'd go, okay, let's do TikTok live.
Yeah. No, I do think that's a really good point, Melissa, which is I think DeSantis probably didn't scare Mike Pence off.
No, I don't think he did. And if anything, like, again, I just said it in jest, but if I were his team, TikTok comes with all of its own political baggage now, especially with how Congress is reacting towards it, that whole thing. But another platform, he could choose to say, you better get me the smoothest announcement sort of thing. He goes on, they show, millions of views kind of thing, and he's able to say, I was able to do it right.
Yeah.
With no errors.
Yeah. But Melissa, we've said before, Mike Pence has wanted to be president his whole life, really. And he was vice president. I think it's unlikely he's looking out at the field and thinking about who he wants to throw his support behind. But you feel like this long runway to an announcement has been him testing out the viability of a campaign that is not supported by the person that he served as a running mate to. Mm-hmm. And I have to say, it's a very hard thing to reckon with. Because when you're thinking about running, everyone around you wants you to run because it's their jobs, they're slated to go along with you for the ride, and you can get inside a bubble. But I do wonder if he has the ability to step back and realize that it's not viable, that the message doesn't work, that it's too complicated, that and I don't think he was impressed with DeSantis' run, but you gotta wonder if he saw Tim Scott's run and thought, I could make a real difference.
Yeah, be a kingmaker.
Throwing my weight behind Tim Scott.
I completely agree, because one of the reasons why I think he's gone so long is that I think his team realized that the prime time for him to have jumped in was a week or two after the midterms.
Yes.
When all of the media was completely down on Trump. Remember, we had the whole narrative November, December, January that Trump was out of touch, that the Republican Party was no longer, running, coming up behind him, defending him. They want somebody else. So he should have jumped in then. and he would have ridden that wave as the clear alternative. It probably would have stumbled DeSantis in his discerning at that point as well. And I think that his narrative was created and Trump was down, and it might have been the sort of, because Trump started to resurge again in February, March, and now is sort of back, and obviously the indictment in New York really helped him kind of thing. But I'm really wondering if his team is regretting not jumping in at, like December 1st, and is now wondering, can we endorse, or do we just jump in because it's, it's been his destiny, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, no, really, really interesting. And so, again, the field is taking shape, and it's going to be, there are a lot of sort of important sort of sub campaigns that are gonna play out, and we'll track those as it happens. I think that's all we have for this episode. Thank you for listening. We'll be back with you next week. Until then, you've been listening to Where We Are.
Bye.
It's the end of the weekend, but I still wanna turn up. Yeah, I still